Thank you so much, Mr. Baz. And I think our minds must have undergone some very good intellectual warm-up after going through such insightful thoughts by our honorable speakers. And now it's time for the next panel, and as we are a little behind time, we will keep it little more pacey. India in the region and the world, leadership through dialogue. Well, 21st century is known to be Asian age, and it won't be wrong to call it Indian age too. The end of the Cold War and the growing impacts of globalization are also making India redefine its position and role both at the regional and global level. But it's not only in India's foreign policy that is witnessing changes in power equations between region and among states. I think transition can be seen and felt at every stage globally, and how dialogue is going to help it out. This is going to be focused on this discussion, and now I would like to take this opportunity to call Dr. Yakunin, Chairman, Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, to join me for this discussion. Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, Director, India Foundation and Editor, Salute Magazine. Mr. Sandeep Vaslekar, President, Strategic Foresight Group, India. Yeah, I think all my gentlemen are going to be right, on my right. Yeah, just.
Would you like to sit there?
No, just.
Okay.
Yeah.
There?
Yeah, there.
Mic straight here.
Yeah, it's just okay. So, to my far right is Sandeep Vaslekar, and I would like to start with your quote, sir, that we need an inclusive world, not merely because of the fear of our survival, we need it because hope is feasible. So, I would like to start with you only, and my question is, how you see the dynamics changing in the world order, and how dialogue plays pivotal role, keeping India at the center.
Thank you, Rima. We just heard from Vice President Ansari and Austrian Chancellor about the challenges of New World Order that is emerging. And if you are looking at the key dynamics of the international state of play right now, the main question is, are we going towards a balance of power model, or are we going towards collective security? And at the moment, there are several trends which are suggesting that we are going towards balance of power, as a result of which arms race is in full speed. Vice President Ansari and Chancellor referred to it. 30 years ago, after the end of the Cold War, arms expenditure globally was $900 billion. It has doubled to $1,800 billion. The nuclear weapons have been modernized, and the new nuclear weapons are now deeply penetrating nuclear weapons with 20 times the impact of their weight. The killer robots are coming into being. So overall, the lethality of conflicts is, the instruments of conflicts is increasing. You also have a situation where the inequality is increasing. And that's in the nature of our economy, because the economic progress is driven by technology, and technology is creating growth, but not employment. And as a result of that, all over the world, not just in India, but also in the United States, in the Western world, in Africa, you have growth taking place without employment. And so the inequalities are increasing. So this is the context: growing arms race and growing inequality. How do we respond to that? I think the fake news were probably born on the day somebody, it was Huntington, invented the concept or the term of clash of civilizations. Because clash of civilizations is a fake term. civilized people do not clash, and those who clash are not civilized. So clash and civilization is wrong English or fake term. And I want to compliment Dr. Yakunin and all your colleagues for instituting the dialogue of civilizations. And that is what we need. So when you have arms race growing, when you have inequality growing, you have schisms growing in the world. And you need to cross across this schism, and you need to find ways to have a dialogue, not only between civilizations, but also between different interest groups. And I think that is where we have to begin. And that's where I'll stop.
True, and as Shri Ansari rightly said that there must not be the time when technology gets better on us and starts guiding us. And there you talk of lethality of conflicts, Mr. Waslekar. And now, Major General Dhruv Katoch, I would like to ask you how you see India's vision of the future regional and global order to start with.
One of the things which is written on the board, we are talking of a dialogue of civilizations. So I will pick on the word civilization, and I think this one, I'll just get it a bit closer. I'll simply pick on the word civilization. And the Indian construct has always been that we look upon the world as one. Vasudevaya Kutumbakam is something which is very inherent in Indian thought. Now, the second part of it, what I've seen here, when you're looking at what are the changes which are taking place, and you're looking at really what has caused that change. And in my view, really what has caused the change is the economic change which is taking place across the globe. Now, if you take your mind back to 2000, that is at the turn of the century, Asia had 30% of the global economy. And now, 20 years later, that means in 2020, a major shift has taken place, and the Asian economy will be 50% of the world. At that point of time, some point in 2020, next year, both the economies will be equal. And from then onwards, it is the Asian economy which will be more than the rest of the world. It is the Chinese economy, the Indian economy, the Japanese and the Korean and all the others combined together, which have actually played a very major impact. And that is causing a shift. Now, it is very well to posit that we need dialogues. Obviously, we need dialogues. Dialogues have always been a continual feature of civilizations ever since the dawn of time. But so has conflict. And I think if we should not go wrong in looking at an idealistic world, because if we look at an idealistic world and we leave out the realism part of it, then we perhaps may not be addressing the problem. So we have to look at the world as it is. It is a world where conflict takes place. And I think we have to be realist enough to accept the fact that conflict takes place and then look into mechanisms as to how we can avoid it. If we're looking totally at idealism, then we will miss out on that fundamental point. And the way I see conflict developing, I'm talking of the future, I'll just do it in a very, very short time. When you look at the way the economy has turned, what are China's aims now? China, as per their own statements, they had spent the first 20 years from the turn of the century till now to becoming a strong economic nation with military power. They aim now by 2035 to become a developed country in the true sense. And by 2050, they want to be the #1 power in the world. India, on the other hand, has got a 2.5 trillion economy, and as the Prime Minister stated just a few days back, we aim to increase that to become a 5 trillion economy in the next 5 years. Now, the implications are that what China is looking for, China had always looked for a multipolar world, as was mentioned by the Chancellor, right? We are a unipolar world now. But China no longer looks at a multipolar world. They are looking at a bipolar world now, and ultimately they want to be the unipolar. They want to be the major pole in that bipolar world. India, on the other hand, is looking at a multipolar world. Not just a multipolar world, we are looking at a multipolar Asia. And this is going to create conflicts. And America is very, very focused on retaining its hegemony as the single pole, as the most dominant power. So when you have these three different constructs working around at the same time, seeking hegemony, then I do not think any idealistic constructs are going to work. People are going to compete. If they cannot compete, then there will be conflict. And we should be prepared for that. The dialogues must take place most certainly, but we should also be prepared to see that while dialogue is certainly the best answer, but we should be prepared for all aspects. The Vice President, sir, you made a very, very important comment when you spoke of uniformity. And I've always maintained that uniformity is never the solution. Uniformity, ultimately, I think too many people confuse the word uniformity with unity. And I think there are totally disparate things. Uniformity does not lead to unity. We have seen the example what happened in Sri Lanka when they wanted to impose one language. We had a 30-year civil war. You have seen the example of Pakistan trying to impose a language, and it led to the split up of the country. And you see these trends everywhere across the world, that when you try to impose one particular thought over diverse peoples, it doesn't really work. But in India, I don't think that that problem is there. We are a civilizational state, and while we have hundreds of languages and cultures and various streams going around at one point of time, we are still connected by a common civilizational thread. And I think that is that thread, that very important thread of diversity, which binds us all together. I'll just close with these comments.
Yeah. Dr. Yakunin, well, in the morning when we were having a brief session of questions and answers, then you rightly said that dialogue needs to go for something constructive as far as the civilization of the world is concerned, and India is surely having one of the best heritage and civilization in the world. So how you see India in the emerging international order, and how far this dialogue is going to work in the presence of some probable and vulnerable hegemonies in the new world order?
Of course, I can introduce, ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished moderator, only my own humble opinion derived from the activity of Dialogue of Civilization. So, of course, it is very difficult to answer promptly this question, but nevertheless, I would like to give some statistics firstly, and then to elaborate a little bit more on that. In accordance with the International Monetary Fund report, which is of course not a sacred, Bible or sacred source of information, but nevertheless, they are predicting that the trajectory of the further growing of global economy will be like 3.6% per year, and in 2020, the trajectory will be at the plateau of 3.5%. But what is essential is that it will be due to the development of economy in China and India mainly. And that is very essential statistic. Then, I suppose the next very important observation is that, since we observe kind of crisis of recent type of globalization, where we observe that all the international achievements, international treaties are being thrown away. So we can observe that maybe the next wave of globalization will be based on regionalization, but not in terms of one country or just two countries, but in terms of mega regions. So we already observed that kind of attempts in terms of Euro-Asian development, BRICS country development, etc. So to my mind, this is next very important remark I would suggest further to consider before coming to the essence of your question about the Indian place. But now, coming to here, I suppose it is very important to take some another statistics, and which presents, some features of Indian possibilities. Already with the population 1.3 billion people, India currently hosts 21.2% of the population below the poverty level, approximately 273 million in absolute terms. This is not my personal research. That is the data I am picking up from you. Nevertheless, the overall trend shows that numbers of people living below poverty line are reducing. The Planning Commission of India has estimated that 27.5% of the population was living below the poverty line in 2004-2005, down from 51.3% in 1977 and 1978. So the trend, and I can continue, but the trend is positive. So this is remarkable because, with this amount of the population, and it is estimated that in 2025, India overcome China by the population rate. It was already mentioned here by Alfred Gusenbauer. I would like to point out it. Because the old formula of economic prosperity, has several elements. Population, territory, and science and technological development. Now it can be a challenge with the digitalization, artificial intelligence, etc. Still, that is development of science and technologies. Every three elements India has here. So to my mind, in the coming future, India has a very essential right and features to become the hub of the socio-economic development in a mega region. And what are the dimensions of this mega region? I cannot say, but of course it is for the Asia and Eurasia possibly, but nevertheless that will be the trend. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll take two questions from the audiences. So any two questions, if you want to ask any question, we can have two questions from the audience, and then we'll start with the next round again.
Over there, there.
Right.
Over there, the one, and first is there.
Right on the camera.
Do we have?
Yes, sir, please.
And the third is here. Okay. Microphone.
There's no microphone, I guess.
You're loud enough.
Well, that is difficult.
When Senator Chu said, or talked about conflict and dialogue at the same time, of course, dialogue is always helps to resolve conflicts. But I was quite surprised by your emphasis on conflict than on dialogue. India is the civilization in this region. China is the civilization in this region. Iran is the civilization. There is a problem in all these civilizations of conflict within and conflict without. And in this region, there is an intervention by a power that wants to retain a unipolar world, and its name is the United States of America. And at its bidding, because you are from the India Foundation, I'm asking you this question, because you people play a major role these days in policy making or inspiring policy, that we are mighty close to that power that wants to retain the unipolar world. And on account of that, we are in conflict or seem to be getting closer to a conflict with the other two powers, with the other two, Iran and China. How do you see India's prospects as a civilization and a great votary of dialogue in this conflict situation?
Please, microphone over there. Let microphone to the person over there.
Oh, you want me to answer first?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there is a misconstruct. I have not laid extra emphasis on conflict. My point was simply, please don't ignore conflict, because my own experience as a military officer is you will get conflict if you are not prepared. It's a simple thing. If you don't have the weapons to protect yourself, someone will attack you, regardless of any civilization construct. Regarding your second point, I think Indian foreign policy and the Indian nation is too mature. We are not going to enter into any camp, whether it's the American camp, the Russian camp, the Chinese camp, the European camp, or any camp. India will stand on its own 2 feet, and we know what our interests are. Indian foreign policy has been very stable since independence till now. Emphases have been given differently, but our foreign policy will remain independent, looking into what are Indian interests. Let us not get too much confused with the word non-alignment, which I think was, perhaps it may have been okay at that point of time. It is a construct which is not valid now, but India's national interests will remain primary to India. And I think the government, the present government, or any government which comes later, will always hold that in primacy, and we know where our interests are lying. I do not visualize any of those problems that we are going to be in the American camp and against China, or in the Chinese camp against America. We will play a balancing game, and we will see as to how it goes. That's my view.
Okay, fine. Next question from over there.
Hi, good evening. Is it possible that the concept of power or the concept of monopolizing or controlling the world might undergo a change in the next few decades, and India might be able to catalyze that? The definition of what would be unipolar or bipolar world, or what is power? And India does have the advantage of being able to possibly catalyze that change, or am I dreaming?
Whom are you questioning to? Whom you want to answer?
All three, whoever would. If I might give a personal reference, some 20 odd years ago, at a Humphrey Fulbright seminar in the US, I had posed this issue, and I had said as my individual view that yes, India would like to be a global power, but not in the current definition sense at the turn of the century. Maybe by 2050 or 2070, if not then, at least by 2100, that definition and concept might change.
Okay, as he has left it open, Mr. Vaslekar, I think you can answer.
Start and then we continue.
Well, that was an easy one, so it's being passed on to me. Well, it's in the nature of states to organize, to expand their power or to aggrandize their power. That's the nature of states. So the purpose may be to project power, the purpose may be aggressive, or the purpose may be defensive. But in any of these cases, a state wants to have power and aggrandize it. That's the basic reality of international relations. And no wishful thinking is going to take you away from that. The question therefore is, when every state has in its interest or in its nature to aggrandize its power, there is obviously going to be a tension, or there is obviously going to be a conflict between the states. But in order to manage that conflict, you have to recognize that your own state is going to aggrandize power as much as the other states are going to aggrandize their power also. So therefore, what world needs is a system, some kind of an institutional mechanism whereby the negotiations and mediation for this constant competition for power is feasible. What is the tragedy of the world today is that the institutions of such mediation are getting weaker and weaker. The UN Security Council is dysfunctional. The UN social organizations are functional, but they are not relevant when it comes to mediating the relationship between various powers. There aren't too many institutions in the world which are able to even resolve their internal conflict or the regional conflicts. SAARC, from the point of view of conflict resolution, is completely dysfunctional. Gulf Cooperation Council was a functioning organization, but that is split in the middle. So you have Saudi Arabia and its camp on one side, and you have Qatar and its camp on the other side. OSCE is, you can say, the only institution which is kind of functional, but it is not really mediating in conflicts all that much. It has been completely ineffective in Ukraine. It's okay for democracy promotion. And ASEAN, by its rule, doesn't get involved in conflicts and doesn't get involved in internal affairs of other countries. So the world is facing an institutional void in mediating a situation where all states are bound to expand their power for whatever reason, defensive or offensive reason. And therefore, the intellectuals and others, policymakers and others, need to apply our mind as to how to fill this vacuum, how to fill this institutional vacuum. Now, there is one good news. When the United Nations was formed, when the Bretton Woods institutions were formed in 1945, formation of institutions and ideas on the formation of global institutions and global governance was a total monopoly of states. It was only the states who could propose the United Nations. It's only the states who could propose Bretton Woods institutions. Today, many actors outside the states, the positive actors, I don't mean the negative actors outside the states, are in a position to infuse ideas into the states. India Foundation is one, which is the Indian state. But globally also, there are many institutions, civil society has opportunities, intelligentsia has an opportunity. The state structures are more open today than they were in 1945, not completely open, but more in relative terms. So there is a scope today for cross-fertilization of idea and for thinking both within the states, primarily within the state structure, but also to infuse the states with various ideas from outside. And this is what we really need to address, this institutional void that is becoming deeper and deeper and wider.
Dr. Yakunin, would you like to add to that?
When we are talking powers, you need to answer the question. You know, in the 20th centuries, under powers, we all understood states. Big, super big, small states. Nowadays, in our science, political sciences, we should assume that there are a multiplicity of the actors who are pretending to participate in political processes. We were not able to be ready for this diversity. Look, you know, social linkages, internet, you know, mass media, all those, and some, you know, groups, you know, just a person, the blogger, who can, you know, invite millions of people to come to the place to do something. It is not power. That is, you know, some new elements of the civil societies which we should take into consideration when we are talking who are the players. And that is absolutely new system. This is first. Secondly, you know, because, you know, very often we are talking about international law. But international law was based on the unilaterally accepted global system which we call world order at that time. It was created after the World War II. But today, when just one power is taking the advantage to use its superiority, military superiority, and I'm not talking about only the United States of America, you know, to prove I am right with military advantages. And this is not correct. And we should now consider that some new system, which Jagdish Kapoor called a world human order, should be installed, should be introduced. Some new system of international law based on the reality should be introduced. That's why, for example, in GOC and myself, I of course, you know, welcome the creation of those mega regional institutions like Euro-Asia, you know, Asian Leaders Summit, which we just observed recently. Those are new institutions to be installed and to be introduced into the reality. So we do not have all the answers, but the answer is until all the players, all the actors, political actors, understand that, you know, we are facing a major problems, environmental problems, social problems. We are facing the world where 800 million people are lacking the pure water, and 11% of the global population are starving because of hunger, until our societies, our civilizations, accept that as a basis for the creation of new system, we will be coming from one crisis to another crisis. And this is the intention of Dialogue of Civilization Research Institute, World Public Forum, World Dialogue of Civilization Rhodes Forum now name, to introduce some new way of thinking, initiating the activity of the civil societies, and hoping that the states, the politicians, pick up from the civil society some new ideas. Thank you.
Okay, my next question goes to Mr. Waslekar again. Well, a relation between India and China will have a crucial impact on the entire region. Like currently we have three most important players in the region, Japan, India and China. And if talking two of them, China and India, with China's steadily increasing influence, what are the possibilities for both China and India to co-define the parameters of a new regional order rather than turning into adversaries with coming times?
I think it's a reality that globally and regionally, there is always a competition between powers which are ahead and the powers which are catching up. That's the situation even here. China has, over the last 30 years, gone far ahead of India in terms of per capita income, in terms of scientific and technological developments, in terms of infrastructure development, but it is behind India in many of the soft sectors. So, but in the end, technology drives, science and technology drives the economy and the progress. China has a whole battery of petaflop computers. We have only one petaflop computer, and that's also 1/10 of the strength of the Chinese petaflop computer. China is, in the next 10 years, bound to dominate the artificial intelligence sector in the world. The Chinese companies are going and buying small artificial intelligence companies in Ukraine, in Estonia, maybe parts of Russia also. We are not going and buying artificial intelligence companies and talent from around the world. There are many other areas. The Chinese are leading, they're exploring 97% of the rare earth elements in the world, which are going to determine the many of the new technologies like the solar technologies, telecom, etc. So the Chinese have established an advance in certain sectors, but the Chinese are also weak in many sectors. The Chinese management of water resources is bizarre. 7,000 lakes simply disappeared from the northern China in the last 20 years. The Chinese environmental crises are severe. And the inequalities, while they both exist in China and India, the Chinese inequalities are not much talked about, but they are quite critical. So, first we have to understand China. That is what, and I don't mean just a small policy community, but if India as a nation is engaged with China positively, negatively, competitively, cooperatively, whatever you call, India as a nation must understand China. What is China? What is happening in China? What's inside happening in China from the Chinese and Indian perspective, not just from the Western perspective. So I think that is, and similarly the Chinese must try to understand India. So that is for the realities of what the countries are, not for some utopian vision. So that is the first requirement. In order for China and India to shape the region ahead, that we must understand each other's countries in the deepest way, and there are many ways to go about it. Second, we need to increase the level of dialogue between China and India. There is always a dialogue taking place right up to military exercises between China and India. But this level of dialogue has to be based in reality. It has to be based in the reality of the adversarial history, adversarial interest in the future. It's not that goody-goody dialogue that I would advocate, but we have to take into account the realities, and you have to have a realistic dialogue with a way to find a concrete way forward. And finally, I would say the Chinese and the Indians need to develop a common vision of Asia, whatever it is. Europe has a common vision of Europe, including Eastern Europe. Latin America has a common vision of Latin America, despite Venezuela. North America has a common vision of North America. Africa has a common vision of Africa. Asia is the only continent in the world where there is no common vision of the continent, for natural reasons. But one of the efforts that China and India need to do is to reflect on where do we want this continent to go, where do we want this whole geopolitical mass to go, because between China, India and the other countries you are talking about 3 billion plus people, almost half of the world's, 40% of the world's population. So we need to figure out where do we want this region to go, we need to have serious thinking on that. So before we can think in terms of what kind of strategic options that exist, which the policymakers on both countries are thinking, there are some fundamentals which need to be addressed. And only when those fundamentals are addressed, we will be able to take the next step.
Yes, please.
And we also, if I may add, should stay on reality background. Talking about, relations between China and India, whatever controversies two countries have. But by statistics, China is far the largest source of India's import. This is true. And by figures, China's export to India amounted to 73.7 billion or 14.5% of its overall imports in 2018, while, India's export to China amounted to 5.1%. So we have a realistic background to consider the development of the relations, because already economics is here. Thank you.
True, and I think very rightly you said, Mr. Vaslekar, that India needs to understand China and vice versa. And I would again like to quote Shri Ansari here, that dialogue is not something that you are seeking for some results immediately and something should come out, but it's about understanding the person and reading out the mind. Well, my next question goes to Major General Katoch, that how can India address its security concerns such as border disputes with Pakistan and China? Because I would like to mention in the recent Bishkek Declaration, two words were used, while that nations should take in account their security and sovereignty and concern. This politicization and double standards should be avoided, which says lots between the lines. How you take it?
Firstly, I'll just address it, the question with respect to China. I think ever since we had the Peace and Tranquility Agreement in 1993, and followed 20 years later by the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, we've had no major flare-up. We've had no firing, not a single bullet has been fired across the border between the two countries. And the first time we came close to a flare-up was in the Doklam crisis, which was handled, it took about 73 days, but ultimately it got handled. It got handled through dialogue. I think there is, between the relationship between these two countries, I think there is always that chance that some things may go wrong. But if you talk to each other, I think the diplomacy should be able to handle it. But speaking from the military viewpoint, it is my view that if India becomes militarily weak, you will have conflict. There is no question about it. If China thinks they can take their claim areas across the McMahon line, they will take it if they think they can do it. In my own interaction with some of the Chinese scholars, we didn't talk about this, but we spoke about Taiwan. And I asked those people, and they are from the government. And they made a very straight statement. They said, listen, we are weak now. The day we are strong, we will take Taiwan, period. Now that is what the Americans are trying to prevent with the first Allen chain. And that is what the Chinese are trying to get through with the 9-dash line. That is the first point of the conflict. But for India, it is vital that you have the appropriate level of superiority over the Tibetan plateau if you want peace, and adequate naval capability in the Indian Ocean region if you want to have peace. Having these two, please carry on with dialogue. There will be no war. That is the first point. The other things, I think it's very important that India and China, we have got a great deal to cooperate in it, on climate change, on environmental issues, on terrorism. So our commonality of interest, even on energy supplies as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, both of us are so heavily dependent on the energy flows which go through the Indian Ocean. So as far as both the countries are concerned, we have got similar vulnerabilities. And I think because we have similar vulnerabilities, there is a great deal that we can cooperate together. One of the problem areas which I have in my own interaction with some of the Chinese scholars in my visit there, I think the people-to-people interaction between India and China is practically non-existent. I mean, the number of Indians who go to China is practically, well, it is very, very low. We just don't have that level of interaction. And I think if you wish to sort of have that civil society interaction, there is a requirement for a large number of Indians to learn Chinese and then go there, because out there they will only speak that language. On the other hand, a large number of Chinese are visiting India. So the flow of traffic is more from China towards India than on the other side. Coming down to the next neighbor, Pakistan. You know, Pakistan is no longer a conventional military threat to India, but unfortunately they continue to pose very serious challenges as far as terrorism is concerned. And I have consistently, many people continue to ask me, they said, listen, why aren't we talking to them? My point is very simple. You have talked to Pakistan for 7 decades. You went to the 48 war, you went through the 65 war, you went through the 71 war. After that, you had 3 decades of conflict, of a proxy war being waged by Pakistan against India, and we have been talking. And then they did Kargil, when our Prime Minister went there on a bus for peace. It is primarily because we are looking at peace. Please don't look at peace as the default condition. Look at Pakistan as conflict as the default condition. Start from there, you will get peace. Let us work. We have to work around things in a different way. We have to deal with Pakistan in a different way. Please deal with that country in a different way. It's not a normal country. Pakistan is the only country which takes a gun, puts it on its head and says, if you do that, I'll shoot myself. No, we don't want that anymore. We have to tell Pakistan no, and make it a very firm no. You hit us, we'll hit you back. And you keep hitting us, we'll keep hitting you back till we break you. At some point of time, the civil society in Pakistan will say, this military of ours is no good, please throw them out. Once that stage comes and we have proper democratic structures within Pakistan, you will have dialogue processes, you will have people-to-people contact, and you will have peace the way we have peace with Bangladesh. It can happen with Pakistan too, but the military has to go.
Thank you. Dr. Yakunin, what's your outlook of India's internal and economic and political structures be advanced in order to sustain its economic growth and capacity of the state, keeping the situation prevailing in the region at present?
I already touched upon this question more or less, and of course I am far from being the expert to give Indians, the way they should structure their political system and economic system. I can be, consider the general situation globally, but to my mind it is very essential that India is preserving, this is a key word, diversity in all the features of the life of the society, and India is preserving its sovereignty very strongly. It is very essential, when we were preparing to come here to launch some kind of a liaison office here, we learned that in India, by the law, for the foreign entities, whatever NGOs, it is not permitted to teach the kids, for example, to teach the students, and all the entities should have Indian supervisory boards. So this is very essential in terms of keeping India a sovereign state and to keep sovereignty here. Though sovereignty, through the period after 2000, maybe up to now, is not a very fashionable name, because somebody is trying to say that, keeping to sovereignty means to be nationalistic. It is not true. To be just oneself. This is first. Secondly, India has very developed already spheres of economy, like pharmacological sphere, IT system, and computer sciences. So from this point of view, I suppose when we are, comparing the strengths of Chinese economy and the strengths of Indian economy, we should keep in mind that Indian specialists and Indian kids, by the way, are one of the most strongest in the world in terms of applied mathematics IT systems and, is growing sector of artificial intelligence. So they would be the profound features of the Indian economy to sustain in its development further.
Thank you very much. And now, last two questions from the audience quickly, and after that, we will wind up the first session with that only. Last two questions, brief questions. Any questions? Yeah, please. Quick and brief.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful to Dr. Baizana. He brought out a very nice point regarding that China has got its eyes on development through different process, but it also is trying to negate the European Union. And was it that reason it called for a dialogue of Asian countries in May 19, only a couple of months back? And is it now trying to head towards creating a union of Asian countries, as the point was just now brought up? There are a lot of benefits for that. It creates a very fine dialogue if we do that. But is China now trying to change its entire stand and policy, or is it trying to get its old aim through other methods? Thank you.
Listen, by my humble experience, I should say that, I rather frequently have the possibility to be in China and working on Belt and Road Initiative, talking with different representatives of different layers of Chinese society. And to my mind, the Chinese approach is now not to suppress Europe, but to try to find the way to consolidate European society, European states, in terms of promotion the idea of Belt and Road Initiative, because China, as a very rapidly developing economy, needs markets. It does not need, the clash. It needs cooperation. From this point of view, when they and Alfred today referred to these 16 countries, to be organized in promotion kind of Chinese policy here, I suppose it is not just, the idea to suppress somebody, but to prevent negative reaction on the part of European countries, European Union, in terms of Chinese investment into the Europe, for example. I don't know if my panelists agree with me here.
Fine. And with this, we would wind up with this first session of discussion. Thank you so much, Mr. Waslekar. Thank you so much, Major General Dhukatoch and Dr. Yakunin, for joining us.
Thank you.